Batman has been kicking it in DC Comics since 1939, and with a continuity as confusing as DC's, he has gone through quite a few interesting retcons. Batman has received a few origin stories over the years the character has been around, but of them all, Batman Year One may be the best. Very similar to Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, the story shows Bruce Wayne returning to Gotham City after his many years traveling the globe and training with many different masters. He comes in with a roughed out idea for how to bring justice to Gotham, and the story ends with him setting out goals and having a defined mission. But before he has that, Bruce goes out into the streets of Gotham without a costume and trying to fight crime, and as you might expect, he gets pretty thoroughly thrashed. Bruce goes back home, not doing too well physically, and he takes a little bit of a rest in his father's chair. As he dwells on the passing of his parents and asking for a sign of what he must do, through the night, a literal bat comes crashing through his window, and that is why he becomes Batman. It's iconic. Well, in Batman Court of Owls, that iconic image is defouled by the arrival of an owl that pretty brutally wipes that bat from the face of the earth. Considering the Court of Owls' role in the story, it's impossible to argue that it's not a rather on-the-nose attempt at symbolism, but there are some that absolutely hate that DC did this, and there are also some that appreciate the power of the new image. Now, Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, actually no, that was not always the case. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne, not as a returning childhood butler, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so Alfred had always been within the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that the change was made and stuck. When Batman became the God of Knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair during the Darkseid War event in Justice League Volume 2 number 42 from 2015, he became able to find out the answer to pretty much any question he asked, and one of the first things he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. Now, this was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learn that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer, Jeff Johns, stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Personally, I think it's best this stays in Elseworlds, as it just opens up way too many questions about Batman's already weird continuity. Now, Batman has many iconic villains like the Joker, and all of them stick out in their own individual ways, but there is a strong case to say that Mr. Freeze may actually be one of the most iconic. It may be due to some iconic Batman cartoons, but it's more so to do with the fact that Mr. Freeze has a more understandable motive to commit crime than a lot of Batman's other villains, saving the life of his wife. It's so understandable that while Batman still attempts to stop Freeze, he still finds himself empathizing with the villain in a way that he doesn't with a lot of other villains. So it came as a shock to a lot of people when the New 52 came about and Scott Snyder retconned the continuity so that Mr. Freeze's beloved Nora Freeze became Nora Fields, and Mr. Freeze had actually never even met her while she was living normally. As you can imagine, people were not happy about this, and imagining Nora not as Freeze's wife is just wrong. It's just wrong, man. Now, Batman has a huge plethora of fantastic stories. There are so many iconic ones, and Batman Hush is definitely among them. Striking at the childhood of Bruce Wayne's life with the return of a friend and a mysterious new villain who puts Batman through the ringer, it's a story that features almost all of Batman's biggest villains and hits at almost his entire history. One of the highlights of the story was a fight taking place in a cemetery where Jason Todd, Batman's second doomed Robin, reveals himself to be returned from the grave. The pair face off against each other, and it's eventually revealed that this was actually just the villain Clayface taking on the appearance of Jason Grayson to just really mess with Batman. What's crazy is how Batman knew Jason had passed away, but he was still pretty suspicious that this was actually him because he was really giving Batman a run for his money during the fight. Well, then we got Batman Annual Volume 1 number 25, and it was revealed and retconned that Batman was indeed fighting the revived Jason Todd, and that he and Clayface had managed to trade places near the end of the fight, keeping Batman unaware that the real Jason Todd was running around alive and much stronger. Now, like I said way before, Year 1 was Batman's greatest origin story, but it really only gave Batman his origin and didn't show us how Gotham got all its colorfully dressed lunatics. Enter The Long Halloween. The Long Halloween takes place over several months and goes through all the seasons. It starts with Bruce being pressured by Carmine Falcone to launder money for him. Bruce then runs into a beaten up Harvey Dent, meets Catwoman, then meets up with Jim Gordon and Dent, who decide to band together to take down Falcone. The scene was actually adapted into 2008's The Dark Knight, but the best moment from the story happens near the middle. This is when the Joker shows up. Joker ends up sending a whole aeroplane careening through the Gotham night, and it leads to an incredibly awesome fight where Batman battles him while also attempting to straighten out the plane and save everyone from being injured. It's amazing. So where's the retcon? Well, this entire sequence was completely taken out of continuity by the Infinite Crisis event, which rewrote various aspects of the previous timeline. Boo. Dick Grayson was the first Robin, and he was an amazing Robin, but his story got so much better when he rose above being a sidekick and became his own hero in the form of Nightwing. The growth and agency that Grayson gets from growing up and moving past being the boy wonder on his own to become Nightwing makes the character just so much more. So naturally, one of the most hated retcons for fans of both Batman and Nightwing was when DC made it so that Batman fires Dick Grayson as Robin rather than having the future Nightwing make the decision for himself. The post-crisis version of events sees Bruce push Grayson away as Robin, culminating in Batman Volume 1 number 416 from 1988, where the firing first took place. The event was mirrored in Nightwing Volume 4 number 79 more recently, where Bruce yells at Grayson to get out of my cave, which kind of made me laugh, if I'm honest, when I first saw it. It's both really strange to see Bruce being such an absolute jerk, but like I said, it also took all of Dick Grayson's agency in forging his own identity away from Batman. One of the best Batman villains to come out of his 70s gritty rebranding was the infamous Ra's al Ghul. First appearing in the story Daughter of the Demon, Al Ghul shows up in the Batcave one day saying he has kidnapped Robin. Immediately, this sets Ra's apart from the criminals Batman is used to dealing with. Now, naturally, Batman saves Robin while also faking the passing of his alter ego, Bruce Wayne. So now, Batman takes the fight back to Ra's al Ghul. Bruce and Robin track him down to the desert where Ra's and Talia al Ghul are attempting to create a plague to wipe out the Earth's population. Ra's gets resurrected by the Lazarus Pits and the Dark Knight, who was shirtless for some reason but not tightless, like he still had the bottoms on, and the Demon's Head engage in a battle of fisticuffs. Ra's manages to defeat Batman but gets bamboozled when Batman recovers and tracks Ra's back to his camp. Batman comes like busting into Ra's tent, taking the villain completely off guard as he yells, "Are you a man or a fiend from hell?" It's iconic. It sets Batman as a strategist and combatant that he hadn't really been before, and the whole thing was wiped out from canon by Crisis on Infinite Earths. When the DC Universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes were quite a bit younger. This, unfortunately, causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo, or with just Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked. But DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd established in their roles. Enter retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim, the third Robin, was originally introduced after Jason Todd had passed away at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin. And fans hated this so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon. Another consequence of New 52 was that in order to explain how Batman had a 10-year-old son, Damian was also retconned to be a genetically engineered baby who had grown faster than normal. It's weird. Now, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all the horrible crimes he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated. So, it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight strapped with a gat, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. Batman, alongside a lot of other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for lead and turned him into the guy who drawed the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just putting them in the hospital for a long time, I guess. In the New 52, every Green Lantern event ever had apparently now taken place across less than 5 years. That doesn't make any sense. Or there's the little Batman and the rest of the family having to have operated as an urban legend for an unbelievably long amount of time, especially for Damian Wayne to make any sense at all. Speaking of them though, Barbara Gordon was still paralyzed by the Joker, but it was only for like a year now. The thing that really irks people is that DC probably could have cleared up all of that with like a one-shot simply laying out the new timeline for various characters, but they didn't. The Crisis on Infinite Earths was one of DC's first ever massive big retconning events. It essentially got rid of DC's multiverse, which was highly controversial and also deemed somewhat unnecessary by others, which has turned out to be true as they've gone back on that completely since. But initially they did it in a way that is just baffling. Superboy Prime, from an alternate reality himself, got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he just punched a hole in reality. He punched reality so hard, the multiverse came back. That's it. That's the point. Thank you. You're welcome. Now, again, in the New 52 era, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was not a founding member of the team, a place that he held for years. Instead, now his spot was taken by Cyborg, who was now created thanks to a mother box. This had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans, meaning it was erased completely. I personally liked the change just a little bit, because I've always felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites, but at the same time, Martian Manhunter is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be the one of the original defenders of the planet. It may be a weak argument, and I know that many people weren't too happy with the changes at all to both the JLA and the Titans, but let me know your thoughts down below. But Wonder Woman was actually done dirty in an incredibly similar way as Martian Manhunter was, only for her, this happened much earlier, all the way back in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like the Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman lost her original spot as a founding member of the Justice League thanks to the Crisis. Following that event, Wonder Woman's history was changed so that her first appearance in continuity occurred with her reintroduction in 1987. This meant that all of her history, particularly with the Justice League, was basically now null and void. The solution was to instead put Black Canary in her place. Now, look, I like Black Canary, she's cool and all, but she's no Wonder Woman, man. This decision was incredibly unpopular, and so Wonder Woman got her position back eventually, but that ultimately also tied into the history of Wonder Woman, which itself is just a big ol' mess full of retcons. But instead of talking about that, I want to touch on a retcon that changed the Amazons themselves. Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman is largely liked and supported by fans, but there is one thing it did which kind of made the Amazons seem like monsters. Basically, this story adds that every 3 decades, the Amazons will actually go outside of Themyscira and will raid ships and basically sleep with the sailors in order to make more Amazons. It shows them doing this, but at the end of their little excursion, they wipe out all the men they had slept with and throw them overboard. And any male children they create end up being sold off to other nations and factions of people. The original story of the Amazons is basically established as a means of female empowerment, but this new origin is basically going 180 on that idea by making them into monsters and pretty much savages. What is really weak about this retcon is that it has a massive plot hole in it, and that is that Wonder Woman has no idea of this evil backstory at all. It's a cool concept, but one that ultimately goes nowhere in the story, and it just makes the Amazons seem kinda evil. Superman's origin story has been retold countless times. Kal-El's parents sent him to Earth as his homeworld, Krypton, was destroyed. Now, the exact details of how it was destroyed have morphed and reshaped over the many years since, but historically the destruction of Krypton has been largely a natural disaster. Then came along Brian Michael Bendis and the introduction of Rogol Zaar. Essentially, Rogol Zaar was an alien humanoid monster who was now responsible for the destruction of Superman's home world. But he was also a creation of Superman's own father, Jor-El. As you can imagine, that little tidbit did not land well with pretty much anyone, and it also came across as super unnecessary. Sure, it gave a face to the destruction of a home that Superman probably doesn't even remember, and it even gave a familial connection between the monster and Superman, but it also makes Jor-El responsible for the destruction of himself, his wife, and his planet. I don't like it. On many other lists like this, I have talked about the origin of Hawkman, but mainly how it's so overly convoluted because of the sheer amount of retcons done to the character, making it hard to follow exactly what his origin and story is. One of those origins involved an Elseworld story known as Hawkworld. Hawkworld became so popular, what was once a one-shot became a series and then eventually became actual canon. The consequences of that happening was that the entire legacy of Hawkman during the Silver Age was completely erased for that to work. I feel like DC does this a lot. There have been so many DC retcons that I've looked at where characters have entire chunks of their already established lore just cut out, and it's never ever a great time for those characters or for the fans who are trying to follow along. We should probably stop doing that. Speaking of that though, when Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So, when Barry got powers, he took on the identity to honor him, making the original Jay Garrick Flash a cosplayer. Thankfully, this was retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally was transported to Jay's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that he had remembered and then written down. As Barry explained it, obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was turned in on Jay's vibratory Earth. This is a weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe, as this is also the introduction of the DC multiverse and eventually led to the Crisis on Infinite Earths. One of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC's comic book history both in the actual continuity and in real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspects of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like such a strange choice to make. There are characters who now existed that themselves are the legacy characters of some of those who are in the Justice Society, meaning that now those legacy characters need to explain how that still makes sense. Following Backlash, it was changed back to normal, thankfully. And lastly, I want to talk about Brainiac. Post-Crisis, Brainiac was an alien scientist who possessed a psychic named Milton Fine. After a number of stories, Brainiac ditched Fine's body, and after his attempts at stealing new bodies are thwarted, he builds a robotic body for himself and calls himself Brainiac 2.5. Then, when trying to upgrade himself, Brainiac's future self, called Brainiac 13, travels back in time and possesses his present self. Even though Brainiac was eventually wiped out in the event comic Our Worlds at War, we still saw him return with no actual explanation, but this time he returned as a swarm of nanomachines, and in that storyline, Brainiac was reintroduced, and Supergirl explained that all the versions that we saw before were just probes sent by the real Brainiac. If it sounds like the previous versions of Brainiac being probes sent by the original makes no sense, when one of them came came from the future, it's because it doesn't make sense. And it's even more confusing because this Brainiac is based on his incarnation from the DC animated universe, who collects cities to gain knowledge from planets and then destroys those planets. The previous Brainiacs we saw were out to rule the universe, so that means that the real Brainiac sent out probes who had goals that were completely different than his actual goal. And coming up first today, most DC fans recognize the hero known as the Spectre as one of the most powerful beings in the comic book universe. As a personification of God's spirit of vengeance, Spectre was an ancient force of pure justice, and he is so astronomical in his scope that he requires a human host in order to even be able to comprehend our human nature. One of the first of these hosts was Jim Corrigan, who was resurrected after his passing in order to become the host for the Spectre. But what may surprise some people to find out is that originally, during the Golden Age, Jim and the Spectre were actually just simply the same guy, with Jim just being a detective who would dress up as the Spectre and had some pretty cool ghost-like powers. The retcon here came when DC decided to split the two into two different entities entirely, making the Spectre one of the most powerful beings to exist in their comics. Now, during the first part of this list, we talked about how during the New 52 reboot, DC had altered the Justice League's starting lineup, replacing Martian Manhunter with the Earthbound hero Cyborg. Now, when Cyborg first showed up on the scene, he was a star football player who got extremely injured, which led to his scientist father to merge his body with advanced technology to create the technological hero who then debuted as a member of the Teen Titans. Well, alongside his new debut as a founding member of the Justice League, his origin was also slightly tweaked to have it so that the advanced technology that he was merged with was now a mother box from Darkseid's world of Apocalypse. This was a huge boost up in his actual power, giving him a huge list of new abilities and making him much more significant in the conflict with Darkseid, who was the one who brought together this team of powerful justice-inclined heroes. And it became the new favorite origin as well, even being the origin shown in Zack Snyder's Justice League live-action movie. But moving on from that, anytime a new Batman movie is set to come out, one of the biggest questions anyone has is who is going to be playing Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, sure, whatever, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, a mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, what if I told you that actually, no, that was not always true. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne for the first time. Not as a childhood butler of the character, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so that Alfred had always been with the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that that change stuck around. But sticking with Batman here for a sec, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all of the horrible crimes that he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just kinda has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated. So it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight wielding a 9mm, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. That's right, the Batman, alongside almost all the other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for bullets and turned him into the guy who drawed the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just severely maiming them. But moving on from Batman to another Justice Leaguer, the Flash is one character that I think people don't actually realize had an incredibly tragic life. Like, a lot of stuff has gone wrong for him, with one of the biggest being the passing of his own mother, which was then blamed on his father, who didn't actually do do it. For a while, Barry Allen had been wiped out, but actually transported into the Speed Force. So when he returned in Final Crisis and Flash Rebirth, he had a big huge face-off with Eobard Thawne, his most iconic villain, the Reverse Flash. But DC brought a massive change to Eobard's character when they made it so that this time-traveling villain was actually the one to cause almost every single hardship the Flash had ever had, including the passing of his own mom. In Flashpoint Reverse Flash, we actually get to see Eobard traveling into the past and trying to end the Flash, but since he can't do that because he'll create a paradox and he can't take out Iris West, who's Barry's girlfriend or lover, he just decides to go back to Barry's childhood and make Barry's younger days a literal nightmare. He makes the young Barry fall downstairs, he makes him miss catching a baseball, makes him drop all his books and his papers. Eobard even snatched away the one friend that Barry Allen had, erasing him from the time stream completely. It's not funny, but just remembering the look on Barry's face as this full-grown man dressed in yellow just ruins his life, it kinda cracks me up. I'm sorry. Now, have you ever wondered how DC Comics first got their multiverse? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, who was Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So, when Barry got powers, he took on the identity of that hero to honor him. This was eventually retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally found himself transported to Jay Garrick's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe entirely called Earth 2, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that Fox had remembered and written down. As Barry explained it, quote, "Obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was tuned in on Jay's vibratory Earth," which is a weird sentence. Now this was a super weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick back into the real world, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe because this is also the first introduction of the DC multiverse in order to explain all the Golden Age heroes and how they existed at the same time as all the new heroes. But then they created a whole other problem, which is why we got the Crisis on Infinite Earths in order to clear everything up, which it didn't even do. I don't want to get into that though, so we're gonna move on. Now this one is one that I'm not sure if everyone knows about. I think like half the fans know and the other half have no idea. Basically, when Wonder Woman first came on the scene, the character being tied up happened to an increasingly uncomfortable degree. This was because her co-creator, William Moulton Marston, incorporated his, preferences into her stories and powers. Like, infamously, he made Wonder Woman's greatest weakness being tied up or subdued by a man. This was pretty quickly retconned even before the Comics Code Authority cracked down on comics in the 50s. Later writers didn't share Marston's interests and views and felt that Wonder Woman's weird and oddly specific weaknesses were unnecessary, not only unnecessary, but just a tiny bit sexist and humiliating as well. This major DC retcon went unnoticed for actually a really long time until some dedicated readers dug into Wonder Woman's past. But speaking of that, Arthur Curry is Aquaman. He's the guy. When people think of the blonde-haired, golden fish scale wearing hero, they are thinking of Arthur Curry. Or are they? Ooh. Arthur Curry is DC's official Aquaman. That part isn't wrong, but when you look at the Golden Age Aquaman, that is actually not Arthur Curry. That version of the character, who looks basically the exact same, with all the same powers, is actually just some unnamed water-based hero who actually kind of despises us regular Earth humans and fought against the Axis powers during World War II. DC had only introduced Arthur during the Silver Age of comics, and he became accepted as just the guy who had always been Aquaman. As he got more and more popular, DC just kind of quietly swept Golden Age Aquaman under the rug and pretended that they were the same person the whole time. It's actually kind of hilarious because the only reason no one realized was because, I mean, it's Aquaman. No one cared. Now when it comes to the Green Lanterns, John Stewart is pretty universally known as the serious, disciplined disciplined one, and that is mainly to do with the fact that he is a retired US Marine. But despite his current gruff, serious, hard reputation, a lot of people forget that when John Stewart first came on the scene, he was actually a pretty rebellious dude who actually had a background as an architect. He was chosen by the Guardians specifically because he was rebellious. Hal Jordan at the time was the Green Lantern's super conservative, serious, main guy lantern, and they chose Stewart specifically to counter him. It wasn't until the animated series that John was finally introduced in the way that we actually know him today. Last but certainly not least today, I have decided to include what may just be the most hated retcon to grace the pages of the New 52 reboot, turning Lobo into Lamo. In Justice League 23.2 Lobo, it was revealed that the Lobo that we know, the big bike-riding, foul-mouthed, regenerating, Gene Simmons-looking space bounty hunter who pretty much every single comic book fan loved, was actually just an imposter. In actuality, a younger, short-haired, boring, generic as hell looking tiny little dude was actually the real, genuine Lobo. And to usher that change in, Lobo #1 gave us this new Lobo beheading the fan-loved version of the character and deactivating his healing factor. Needless to say, no one liked this version of Lobo, and if you did, I don't believe you and you're just saying that to be difficult. Thankfully, the original version of the character was restored to greatness and we can just forget this ever happened. Please. When Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things that he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learned that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer Jeff Johns stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Now, some retcons are hard to believe, and others are both hard to believe and even harder to keep track of. For example, Hawkman, the whole character. His origins have changed many different times over the character's comic book existence. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall. When he was reintroduced in 1961, he was now an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Qatar Hall, who comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of archaeologist Carter Hall. Now, 2 years later, we learn that these 2 different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. Then in 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. So these 2 people were now both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. Then, in 1994's Zero Hour, they make it so that these 2 are just one person. Then, in 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is, and always has been, a space cop from Thanagar. Then, in 2017, it's explained that Carter Hall was actually a pharaoh who reincarnates because the knife that he was taken out with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship. And then finally, in 2018, it's decided that he can reincarnate not just on Earth, but on different planets as well. But Hawkman isn't the only victim of multiple origin retcons. Another character who got a similar treatment is Donna Troy. The story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman herself. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up, but even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together, and she was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all of her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Now, in one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on a whole other level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, DC's Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately, it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. From the super unnecessary use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which was an example of the way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male heroes, aka fridging, to the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things, there were just some really interesting choices made here. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman's mind as well? It caused Bruce Wayne to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother Eye, and created the Omax. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice, and it caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind-wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. But one of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the Golden Age of comics, that was a huge part of DC comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to the retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed straight up just rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean that they aren't as important, because they are. But moving on from that, when Jason Todd first showed up on the scene after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was kind of downhill from the start. DC made Jason Todd's backstory almost identical to that of Grayson himself, with Jason being part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. So already, this Robin seemed to be targeted by Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old Robin back. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the worst part. After his passing at the hands of the Joker and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, Jason revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was because Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick Grayson and to avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. And sure, that makes some sense, but it makes Batman seem like an absolutely horrible bat dad. But going back to the New 52 era for this next point, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was now, in the New 52, not a founding member of the team, a place that the character had held onto for years. Instead, his spot was now taken by Cyborg, who was also now created thanks to a mother box. Now, this had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans as well, and by that, I mean it was erased completely. Now, I personally liked the change just a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John Johns,
or John Jones, is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be one of the original defenders of the planet. Now, when the DC Universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes are quite a bit younger. This unfortunately causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo, or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked, but DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. Enter retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin. And fans hated this, so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon. But last up for today, Hal Jordan was possibly the greatest Green Lantern, according to the comics at least, but in the 90s, that kinda changed. After the death of Superman and the subsequent reign of the Supermen, Coast City, Hal Jordan's home, was destroyed. This completely changed the Lantern, and he even tried using his power ring to try and revive the city, which was against the Green Lantern's rules.
Although I like Damian Wayne, I do dislike the way he was written into existence, especially when we had a perfectly good explanation for him before the retconned origin or his birth, or really straight up creation, really is what it was. Before Damian Wayne's origin was explored officially in the comic book continuity, Batman and Talia had actually already conceived a child together. One that was kind of intended to be Damian, but you know. At least that's what was implied in this story, Batman, son of the demon. In this story, Talia and Bruce come together because they kinda love one another and even are considered married when this happens. Their passion results in Talia conceiving a child who is hinted to have been given up for adoption at the end of the story, without Bruce seemingly knowing of this child's existence. However, this story, after being written by Mike W. Barr, was at the time not considered to be canon. I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that DC had decided against it being canon after the fact. I'm not 100% sure on that though, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there. Later though, in 2006, they had a change of heart and they actually wanted to see it modernized and incorporated into the main canon. And I thought, great, that sounds awesome. And Grant Morrison, who was writing Batman at the time, was tasked with this. I like Grant Morrison. However, while Damian was initially the natural born product of love in the original story, given up by Talia, possibly in the hopes that her child would have a better life, perhaps, I don't really know. In the 2006 version, Talia forces herself on Bruce, and Damian is a test tube baby that she keeps in secret from Batman, only to drop young Damian on Batman's doorstep 8 years later after he was born. Yeah, a very different take on that story. A lot darker and a lot more like, what? I don't know what's worse for this retcon, Cassandra Cain being evil or the retcon explaining how she was only evil because Deathstroke had brainwashed her using a substance that was only triggered by self-doubt he had helped to build inside her, thereby turning her evil. Say what? This all went down during, you guessed it, the New 52, where Cassandra's Batgirl book disappeared, and in its place we got an evil Cassandra Cain who popped up in Robin. The retcon of this retcon, which honestly is also pretty awful in its own right, even though it's trying to undo something that's also really terrible, was from Titans. In case you want to go back and relive any of this magic. Oh, New 52, New 52. You know, to be honest, this one isn't all New 52's fault. I've always found Black Canary's origins to be a bit confusing, because she is either Dinah the Black Canary, daughter of Dinah, Black Canary, or she is Dinah, who killed a demon and was abandoned by her parents at a young age as her origin was randomly changed during the New 52 continuity, only to be once again changed to a combination of these two origins. Canary, you're making me want to cry. I have honestly mixed feelings about this next one, but I know it's a controversial retcon in comic book history, which is why I'm including it here. We're talking about the explanation for Hal Jordan's unhinged villainous turn as being explained by him being possessed by a fear entity, Parallax. The reason a lot of folks dislike this one is because they feel it actually takes away from the very real turmoil Hal was dealing with at the time, and undermines the trauma his character experiences. It also gives Hal a scapegoat for everything he does while under Parallax's evil influence. Which, you know, I feel like you kinda need, but at the same time, would it be more interesting if it was just Hal and then he had to deal with all that stuff? Maybe. Another retcon that bothers me in terms of the way it was done is this next one, Jason Todd coming back to life. Now here's the thing, I like Jason Todd, I don't mind him returning from the dead and coming back and being Red Hood, all of that actually is pretty cool to me. But what I do mind is the idea of Jason coming back to life only really because Superboy Prime punched him back into existence. What am I talking about? Well, Superboy Prime was trapped in a prison constructed out of basically the Source Wall. The Source Wall in DC Comics, for those that don't know, is basically like the fabric of the universe and reality. It's physical and tangible, but also it's all of reality, so just try to figure that out in your mind. That's what it is. And while Superboy Prime was locked away in this prison, he decided to punch it in a rage. His punch was so powerful that he caused a ripple effect, with his punch extending across reality and altering things across time. One of these things, making it so Jason Todd never really died apparently. Well, he did die, he died for 6 months, but then he miraculously woke up in his coffin thanks to this punch. What a weird excuse for strange retcons DC wanted to make. If you've heard me talk about New 52 on this channel, you know I have a lot of feelings about it. I got a lot of complicated feelings. And specifically, one of the characters I feel mixed up about is Wonder Woman. Not just her either during the New 52 era and how she was depicted, which is honestly less of an issue to me, I think, but more how the Amazons were depicted and how Wonder Woman's origin was changed. That I feel feelings about. There are so many retcons that I have from the world of Batman that make me frustrated, and this is another one of them. It pertains to two beloved Batman characters. Spoiler, who for a time was also Robin, Stephanie Brown, and Batman's friend and ally, Dr. Leslie Tompkins. During War Games, Stephanie Brown ends up getting captured by Black Mask and ultimately is tormented by him before later dying from injuries caused by that torment and an interrogation session. Initially, Batman blames himself for this, having fired her as his Robin and also not getting her to medical care in time. But later in the follow-up story, Leslie is revealed to be the villain in that regard, with it being revealed that she allowed Stephanie to die to teach Batman a lesson about running around irresponsibly with kid sidekicks. I'm sorry, what? And it gets worse. Later still, it would be revealed that Leslie actually hadn't done this, but had swapped out Stephanie with a similar looking cadaver and faked Stephanie's death, instead to teach Batman just teach him a lesson. I don't know what's worse, but neither of these is a good look for Leslie. And also, it really messed with just Stephanie as well. When John Kent first came into the comics, we got to have some quality time with him as an infant and a kid and see him grow up, and it was super cute. It was super cool getting to see Superman and Lois as parents. During this time, he got to know Batman's also relatively new to the comics son, Damian Wayne, and while initially these two didn't get along, they actually became really good friends over time. When they started getting to know each other, they were around the same age, but this changed when John went off to space. During this time, John would age up because space travel, and when he returned to Earth, he'd be a teenager while Damian was still just a kid, putting a wedge between their previously established close bond, as now they were at different places in their lives. While they used to have a stronger connection, they are still friends, but both are at very different points, like I said, in their lives, so there's not a lot for them to relate to. With this retcon, gone were the short-lived days of Super Sons, unfortunately. And I don't know if we'll ever get them back. Although a lot of people have been talking online about how are we gonna reverse that. I don't think we're gonna reverse that, but I like the optimism. Ick, ick, ick. That's all I have to say about this next retcon. It's so gross. Ugh. For a long time, it was one of the reasons I couldn't bring myself to appreciate Dick Grayson as Nightwing or as Robin. This story ruined his character for me, and it honestly took a while before I was ready to forgive him. I can't even comprehend how Babs ever was feeling. That's right, we're talking about the flashback during a stroll down memory lane where it was established in a Nightwing annual that Nightwing had cheated on his then fiancée, Starfire, with Barbara Gordon, after he'd gotten back from some space adventures. What's worse, he had actually come to check on Babs, but also to invite her to his and Starfire's wedding when they accidentally fell into bed together. Yikes. So you may have figured this out already at this point in this video, or if you know me, Amanda, you may have already figured it out a long time ago. When it comes to my thoughts on continuity resets, you may be thinking it's strange that while Amanda has talked about some of the changes made in New 52, she hasn't talked about the massive retcon as a whole. Well, my friends, I've been saving that sweet little nugget just for you. Ew, I can't believe I just said that. I'm sorry. Sweet little nugget. Anyways, yes, if you know me, you know one of my biggest complaints in regards to DC versus Marvel, let's say, is that I find the continuity at DC to be, at best, challenging to navigate. At worst, a complete freaking mess. Most days, I'd say, it's a mess, if you asked me, and a huge part of that is due to continuity resets. What is a continuity reset? Well, let's take New 52 for example. This one happened when we shifted continuities entirely, in essence resetting everything at day 0. Except, not really, because some series continued and were allowed to finish, bleeding into this restart point, making it even worse. And DC is very proud of its legacy numbering, so there are certain series, like Batman and Detective Comics, that have kind of mainly continued with their numbering, and Detective Comics I believe is now in the thousands in terms of issue numbering. I didn't mind all of the decisions necessarily that were made for characters during New 52, but that even for me is a mixed bag. What I did mind was just the idea of giving us a clean slate, because some characters had completely new origins, some characters had their old origins, some characters had some sort of combo weird thing happening. Now, when I talk about comics from before New 52, I have to specify that these are stories from the previous main continuity known as New Earth, and for fans of that era of comics, it technically means that their favorite canon stories aren't really exactly canon anymore. I mean, how weird is that?